that draw that God had for me brought me back to Him. And it was after that I started getting back into the Word. I started studying, and I wrote a book published in 2012, My Purpose versus God's Purpose for My Life. Kind of talked about different scenarios that I'd gone through, about my stories that I'd gone through, whatnot. Anyways, then when we started a church that we left when we moved here, they were having Bible studies, and I started going to those Bible studies, and I started learning about the COMA and the hermeneutics method. That's a way of studying the Bible. Okay, COMA is an acronym. It stands for context, observation, meaning, and application. Okay, so context, what's going on? What's the background? Okay.
Did I spell that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so what is hermeneutics again?
Well, I was going to get there.
Okay,
So context is understanding what was going on there, understanding the culture, okay, because it's also important. When we're looking at Ephesians, right, it's important to understand what was going on in Ephesians, right? So last week we looked in the book of Acts because that helped us to get an understanding, the context of what was going on, okay, in Ephesus at the time. O is for observation, right? Observation is that these are the things that we can see that's going on here. We are observing this aspect, okay? So I observe this is what's happening, okay? Meaning, okay? Now, we got the context. We observe what's going on, the meaning, not to us. This is not meaning to us at this point. This is meaning what it meant to them, right? Because remember, this was not written necessarily directly to us, okay? This was written to individuals. So the book of Ephesus, we'll talk about it, but it was written to those who were in the city of Ephesus and the surrounding churches, because that's who it was written to. So they would understand these different things. So when we're looking at the meaning, we're like, what would it meant to them? Now we can extrapolate that and say, okay, this is what it means to us, or what it can mean to us. Doesn't necessarily translate though, not as far as from Koine Greek to English, but some things were meant for them back then and weren't meant for others. Some are, right? Both Old Testament and New Testament. And then A is for the application. That is where it comes into us. How can we utilize this? How can we learn from these lessons that we've taken from this passage of Scripture and apply it to our Christian walk, to our daily living, to how we interact with others? That's where the application comes in. That's the COMA method. Hermeneutics, it's a long word, but it just basically means the study of literature using that piece of literature. It's not specific to Christianity, but it's mostly characterized with studying of the Bible. Because the way that it works is when you're looking at a passage of Scripture, you're going to utilize the rest of the Bible to help understand that. So instead of going to external sources and say, what does this mean? Okay, well, we can look at other passages of Scripture and we can understand, okay, so this was the root word that was used, and the same root word was used over here, and it means this. Or this passage of Scripture, the way that he termed it, he also termed it over here. So when we're studying Scripture, that's what we're using hermeneutics for. Does that make sense? Okay. So when I do a Bible study, when I'm studying myself, I'm trying to understand these different things, and sometimes I can go really in depth, right? So I do use different sources. I use what is known as the Halley's Bible Handbook, and what this does is it helps to understand the culture of back then. It has pictures in there, has maps in there, and helps us to understand what would help us to see, okay, this is that type of culture. This was going on in the world at that specific time, right? Looking at the timeline. So it's like, this is a great resource for that. And then I also have the McCarthy Commentary Bible, and this is basically a bunch of commentary to help say, okay, so this is what this is, and then you can look at this other passage of scripture to help facilitate that, right? So I use both of those when I'm doing. I have both the physical version and the digital version of that MacArthur Study Bible, and then I have two different study Bibles that I use. I use the NLT, the New Living Translation, and I have an NIV here as well, the New International Version. And I'll use both of those as well when I'm studying, because there are certain translations that use different words, and so I like to look at that. And on my phone, I also have the U version and several other Bible apps like the Blue Logo app. And what I'll do is I'll look at like the root word. What was the root word used? I'll use it to look at the different translation. How did the translator translate this specific word? And so when I'm studying, that's what I'm doing. So whenever I go and have, like, let's say it was an hour Bible study, I would spend 2 to 3 hours preparing for that one Bible study, 1 hour Bible study, because I'm trying to get all this information so I can then teach it.